So while we're on this as a subject of the Renaissance era and everything,
Sure.
we're going to pivot to the next topic, which is, and this is going to be a good one, I think. This is Bob Iger, the Bob Iger era versus the Michael Eisner era. The differences, the good, the bad, the ugly. There's a lot to chew on in terms of this topic.
Good Lord.
Good Lord. There is a lot to go on here.
Yeah.
Let's start with the movies, since we're kind of already talking about the movies. The Bob Iger era versus the Eisner era. What are your overall thoughts on the animated movies from both of these eras? Good, bad, indifferent?
Well, that's interesting. Okay, so when Eisner came in, it was interesting because I don't think he had the same appreciation for animation that maybe Iger did. When Eisner came in, it was just like, hey, look, we have to make Disney successful in any way we can. Do we necessarily do it through animation? And Roy pushed back. Roy was like, hey, look, this is the heartblood of the company. Anything we produce here will become substantial products in merchandising, licensing, in the parks. It imbues creativity throughout the entire company. You get rid of animation, it's the lifeblood of what Disney is. You can't do that. And I think when they started to release the films on video, I think Eisner had a newfound appreciation for what animation could become and for what it was. And so he selected Jeffrey Katzenberg to lead that process off. And, Jeffrey was like, he was not an animation guy at the time. But I think he understood what the audience wanted from Disney, from animated films, and had a really good instincts in how the audience thought of these films and how they associated themselves with these films and really understood what they wanted from them. So when it comes to the differences between the Eisner era and the Iger era, I think a lot of it has to do with Jeffrey Katzenberg, and like we've already stated before, Howard Ashman. When Howard Ashman came in, the whole game changed.
Yeah.
They started to be more musical focused, but in the best way possible. That just, you remember some of those great scores, those great lines, and so forth, and that's probably one of the more profound changes, or one of the most profound differences between that era and maybe the Iger era. Much more musical driven, very technology driven. This is quite interesting, though. I mean, what is your take between the two, in your estimation?
If you were to ask me which era of animation do I prefer, I think because I am more traditional when it comes to Disney animated films. I really am, and I think I would definitely prefer the Eisner era. I mean, even just those Renaissance films. If you take Mermaid, Beauty, Aladdin, Lion King, those films alone, I think, kind of put Eisner era over the top. They were just so good. Not to say the Iger era didn't have its gems. I this might be unpopular and unpopular opinion, but I actually really enjoyed Frozen. I did. It kind of reminded me, in a lot of ways of that Eisner era, that Renaissance era. The music, the sweeping musical sequences. It was very much of that era. But for the most part, I think that Eisner's era of animation was much more rooted in traditional Disney animation, and their storytelling. There were misses along the way, especially towards the end with Home on the Range. And,
the post Renaissance era for sure.
Yeah, and Chicken Little and stuff. But I think for the most part, even if you take the films that didn't do so well, like Atlantis, they were still very much in that same vein of the classic animated movie. I loved things like Tarzan. I just, yeah, I would have to give, with animated films, I'd have to give the win to the Eisner era. In my opinion.
I think so. And a lot of it too is like, you know, a lot of these guys were, who undertook a lot of these films were Cal Arts guys. You know, that there is kind of a connection between the people of the Renaissance era and of the Walt Disney era, because a lot of those guys trained a lot of them through the Cal Arts program for animation. And so with that connection and everything, with Howard Ashman, with Don Hahn, with Jeffrey Katzenberg, it's just that lightning in a bottle, of just amazing talent and guys that were hungry to prove that they could do what so many of them doubted. Ron Miller just didn't have a clue what to do with these guys. This is just this wellspring of talent, and they lost them along the way. Tim Burton was in there, Lasseter was in there. Guys that they just didn't know what to do with, really. They integrated them back in Disney fold in other ways, but man, it's just that talent, that richness, that they kicked them out of the animation building, the Burbank building and into Glendale, and they kind of had this camaraderie when that happened and stuff like that. It was really make or break. That whole thing, God, you just can't get over that. Now the Iger era, which we can kind of get into the Iger and the Eisners. Eisner was, he had his falling out with Pixar, right? Pixar thought they were maybe better or more highly valued than maybe Eisner thought they were. Right. And kind of burned that bridge a little bit.
Yeah.
Ironically, he was selected for his relationships, and now at the end, he's burning them,
right?
Which was unfortunate. But Iger understood. I think Iger was like, "Hey, look, we have not been relevant in a lot of our creative avenues for a while. There's untapped potential here, but we just do not have the creatives that we need to really turn this machine on." And we've got the Pixar guys there who we know are extremely talented, extremely creative, who are gung-ho. We're going to have to integrate them into the company. And we're going to have to fuse, their creativity will provide the fuel for this company going forward. And so I think Iger understood the value of Pixar. And that was a thing, maybe that was, better than his predecessor at that time, was he understood the value of these creators, understood the value of what Pixar brought to the table, and went out and purchased them, integrated a lot of their creators into other parts of the company. And there would be no Iger animation era that we're speaking about if he hadn't done that. So in that way, I give him credit.
No, absolutely. Absolutely. Bob Iger was a visionary in every sense of the word. And he definitely had the insight to know, and this is what Iger had definitely over Michael Eisner, is that Iger understood, I need to buy the cow, not the carton of milk.
Yeah.
I want to buy the cow so I can have milk forever. Where Michael Eisner was more like, well, I'll just buy the milk as we go. Like, for example, Michael Eisner, he bought Nickelodeon Doug. Doug was a hot property back in the day. So what's Michael Eisner going to do? I'll just buy the character. Cool. We're done. Where like, okay, that's great. But like, okay, what happens when the character is not popular anymore? Where exactly. Bob Iger was like, no. You don't buy the character. You buy the whole studio. Because it's the studio, the people in that building that are making these great franchises. So if you buy the studio, they can turn out great franchises for you to the end of time, as opposed to just buying one individual property that's hot right now. So Iger was definitely more forward thinking, I think in terms of that, he made the right move buying Pixar. And I think it paid off in spades. And he's done it over and over again with like Marvel and Star Wars. And, it goes on.
We'll definitely get into for sure. Speaking of that, look, Eisner tried buying the cow. Like in terms of Jim Henson, for example, right? And he's like, "Oh, I'm gonna get in bed with Jim Henson. We're gonna have this amazing, collaboration. We're gonna get the Muppets. It's gonna be great." What he should have probably done was bought, Jim Henson's studio and all of those great puppeteers and so forth, which I don't believe that happened. And because of that, when Jim Henson, the man, died, that was a big hit, in terms of that vision, in terms of that goal. And so, yeah, I think Michael Eisner, some of what he did was very short term and he didn't think about the long term implications of a lot of the stuff that was going on. Whereas Iger was extremely calculated in everything that he did.
Yeah, no, 100%. Absolutely. Yeah. That's definitely the case here. Bob Iger is a long-term guy. He is a long-term guy.
Oh, yeah.
And I know we don't usually talk about the parks when it comes to OrangeNerd, but I want to kind of dive into it a little bit because it's almost impossible to separate these two men without talking about the parks even at least a little bit. Mm-hmm. With Iger versus Eisner, what are your thoughts on the theme parks and their approaches for that? I mean, that's a loaded thing.
I was just gonna say this, okay? That if you want a perfect representation, if you want a perfect encapsulation of what it was like, of the the kind of different styles of management, the kind of prioritization of different things, or if you just wanted a reflection of what the larger implications were for the entire company under the various stages of the Eisner era and the Iger era, you can look no better than Disneyland Resort. Disneyland Resort covers it all when you really think about it. Because as soon as Eisner gets in there, he's gun-ho. He's like, "Oh, I'm going to relaunch this thing. I'm going to build this thing, man. I'm going to do stuff I'm going to make it relevant again." What do you get? You get Captain EO, you get Star Tours, you get Splash Mountain, you get the Videopolis. You get just a drive that's just kind of like, I'm going to get this right here. And it really apexes with probably Indiana Jones Adventure.
Yeah.
And then right after that, exactly, right? Eisner kind of loses his way. And honestly, it's not really his fault. A lot of that I think was Frank Wells, to be fair, too. I would say 3 to 4, really 4 big incidents happen at the same time, right? And they all happen within 6 months of each other, just to understand, guys. Okay. Disneyland Paris falls completely short, right? Just this big old multi-billion-dollar exercise, and it just flops. It's just no better way to characterize it. It flops. And one of the last things Frank Wells did was handle that whole thing, really get that from being so red to being black, and working it out with the bankers and investors and so forth to really kind of get that and manage it under control. But it really was a drag on the company. And Disney themselves, and Eisner especially, lost a lot of enthusiasm and got a little gun shy when it came to a lot of the investments that were going on in the parks at that time. So that's one. Okay? It's just one. Frank Wells dies. And it sets off a tragic wave of events. I mean, if you want to talk about yin and yang, it really is Eisner and Frank Wells. When he passed away, it's just, Tony Baxter talks about it. Tony Baxter and Bruce Gordon. When it came to Splash Mountain, it was like really expensive, this really big investment. It's going to cost a lot of money. And Eisner, even though Brett Eisner, there was that famous story where it's like, "Oh, we got to build this, we got to do this." It's like, okay. But he looks at that price tag and it's like, "Man, I don't know if we can do that, You boys, you meet with Frank Wells. Let's get this figured out." And Tony Baxter and Bruce Gordon, they pitch him all this kind of stuff, and it's just this great, magnificent piece of Imagineering, storytelling, and all that. And Frank Wells is like, "Man, that's really cool." And he just looks at that price tag, and Tony Baxter and Bruce Gordon, they're just kind of deflated because he's just looking at it going, it's just too much. It's just too expensive, guys. And they're kind of crestfallen about it. And Frank Wells comes back and says, "Well, we can't not do it. We got to figure this out." And that's Frank Wells. And Frank Wells was like, "Okay, look, if I come back with this budget, the way it is, I'm going to get killed. So listen, do we need this? Can we do this? Can we do that?" And shaved like $10 million off the budget. Not a whole lot, but just enough to get it going. It was like, okay, I can take this to him and we can get this done. And that's Frank Wells. That he just had that vision, that insight, like, hey, we got to do this project. We cannot. And when he died, it was profound. It was bad. It was really bad. And when and then the next shoe to drop is Jeffrey Katzenberg walking out the door.
Right.
And that has a huge effect on animation and that path going forward. Howard Ashman as well. You could probably file that in there. Animation was completely affected. And then the last thing, quadruple bypass surgery for Michael Eisner. 6 months, all this stuff happens. And it just has a reverberating effect throughout the entire company. I mean, it really, really does.
Yeah.
And we see that. That's why the change in philosophy when it comes to Disney Resort is so profound so fast. In 1995, we have Indiana Jones. It's like this big, all amazing thing. It's like, oh my God, this is incredible. 3 years later, 1998, Tomorrowland.
Oh my God. Yeah.
And it's just
night
like,
and day.
It's night and day, right? There's some quality there, but for the most part, And going through this, by the way, as a kid,
right,
it was very interesting. And then 3 years after that, 2001 DCA.
Right.
Right. And it's just like, whoa. That experience in France really did affect you guys, didn't it? And yeah, it did. Right. And then going through this Disneyland resort kind of lesson here, what do we get? We get a lot of Pixar integration. That kind of merger starts, begins. And you see that with Disney California Adventure and a lot of its rides it gets. A lot of it's Pixar-based. Some things in Disneyland are Pixar-based. And when Iger takes the reins and is in full charge, you could see them coming out of it with the 50th anniversary. Iger's introduced. And when he gets in, it's like, hey, we have to fix what happened in 2001 with the opening of Disney California Adventure. And Iger, when presented many options about what to do, I mean, there were concepts, guys, about Disney California Adventure. Maybe you make it free and don't actually charge for it. It was that kind of, or maybe you make it as one big park. Instead of going into two parks, you splice it together into one big mega park with Disneyland and California Adventure combined. But the last option is, well, okay, we invest into it heavily, like $1 billion+ and make it into the Disney park that it's supposed to be. And to Iger's credit, he knew that option 3 was the right one. He knew it was the right way to go.
It was the right call. And this is going to sound very, very cynical, but I think that it's definitely the reality. I mean, there's a reason why I think that they opted for the 2-park resort as opposed to the one big ginormous Disneyland park. And look, I mean, technically it wouldn't really matter either way. If it's the same rides and stuff, it's technically on paper the same equation. But financially, though, it is different because when you have 2 parks, psychologically, that hits people differently than one big park. So if you were just have one mega Disneyland, people still see it, no matter if it could be 1,000 acres, it doesn't matter. People still see that as one park. Oh, we can do that in a day. It's one park. Once you take it and make 2 parks, the psychology changes. Yeah. It's no longer, I can do that in one day. Well, no, there's 2 parks here. DCA could have been 3 acres. It doesn't matter. It's 2 parks. People think like, oh, I can't do that in a day, And so what happens when you can't do a park in a day? Well, you got to start looking for hotels because you need to start staying another day or two because you got to do everything at the resort, And so I think that it was a smart move to make sure that DCA was a separate ticketed thing because it pushes more hotel stays because psychologically people want to finish everything and they feel like if you have 2 parks, you just can't do it in one day. Whether that's the case or not, it doesn't even have to be even reality. Psychologically, though, the assumption is 2 parks Can't do it. Got to get a hotel.
Right. And, you know, it's quite funny. There have been, if you want to see how this plays out, guys, there's a park I think it was like in Ohio. It was like a Six Flags park adjacent to a SeaWorld park. And Six Flags buys the next door SeaWorld park to make a huge mega resort. It completely flops. It's no longer around.
Wow.
You know, you can, you know, it's a different value statement, right? And it takes vision to do those things. But what Iger did was the bigger risk for sure.
Oh yeah.
Because it's I mean you're investing quite a heavy amount of money, and this was right around the time the stock market was going to crash in 2008. And it was like, man, are they going to stick to their guns? Are they going to do this?
They did.
And they did, you know. And I think, you know, using this Disneyland Resort kind of time stream, this reflection of what was going on in the company, I think you could see that Iger was committed to quality. He was committed to the Disney brand. He was committed to the guest experience and what guests associate with DCA and what they could associate with DCA. And man, he made the right call. I will give him this. That was one of the best decisions he ever made. And he used that as the template going forward to undo a lot of the stuff that maybe Eisner, he bit off a lot more than he can chew. I mean, Eisner, when it came to the parks and resorts, you know, it was quantity over quality a lot of times.
Right, exactly.
And you know, we were talking about the short term versus long term kind of thing. It's like in the short term, this is gonna be great.
Yeah.
You know, but it's like, you know, it's like, man, we have 4 parks now in Walt Disney World, and you know, 2 of them don't feel complete. You have Disneyland Paris over here, and it's like, well, we have contracts where we have to add in another park over there, or else we lose the land, and some crazy negotiation there. We have Hong Kong, you know, and it's really Iger's like, okay, you know, he made a lot of these calls. I have to make them work.
Right.
And that's kind of the way he kind of thought about it. We only got 1 new park under the Iger era, which was Shanghai. And that was, you know, that was a very calculated move to do that. When it came to the other parks, it was like, no, we're going to make them work. We're going to imbue the quality that is befitting of the Disney company, the Disney brand, and we're just going to make a lot of the things that Eisner got us into work on all cylinders like it never had before, because there's so much potential in what he did.
Right.
And so, you know, you look at ESPN, you look at a lot of the ways like he diversified the brand, how he expanded resorts and stuff like that. And it was just taking that, and it was just putting the it that it needed to really burn sound. And that's how you go from, you know, when Eisner walks in, it's like, I think $2 a share. When he leaves, it's about $70 a share. And when Iger leaves, it's like $150+ a share.
Unbelievable.
The way that happens is, you know, yeah, it's calculated in measures. It's these things that you do to make these things work, not so much quantity.
Yeah, definitely. And I think that at least for Disneyland Resort, I think that the Iger era was better for Disneyland Resort. I think that polishing, fleshing out DCA was something that we had to do. It was so important to do that for DCA, and Bob Iger got it done. Is it perfect? No, but no park is perfect. Even Disneyland, the king of all theme parks, isn't perfect. Tomorrowland's a mess, right? So every park is going to have its problems, but DCA is a much better park today than it was before. Definitely. And Eisner was really, really good for Walt Disney World in the sense that he really fleshed out that resort into like a multi-day thing. I mean, geez, he walked in and it was like, I think the only parks there at the time were the Magic Kingdom and Epcot, right? Yep. And then he added Disney MGM Studios, which is now Hollywood Studios. He added Animal Kingdom. You know, he really fleshed that out with a lot of the shopping districts and hotels, and you know, he did a lot of great stuff for Florida.
No, but he did a lot of great stuff for Disneyland Resort too, you know. I mean, look, the Bass Brothers came to him. Yeah, Indiana Jones. But even more than that, the Bass Brothers came in and said, hey, look, you got to make Walt Disney World work, right? Like, Epcot doesn't work the way it's supposed to. We have to improve the state of things here. That's really where the cash cow is. And so he did infuse hey, we're going to build out resorts. We're going to position them next to Epcot to really fulfill the Epcot park and make that work and stuff like that, and just kind of build that resort out and make it a multi-day vacation destination. But for Disneyland, there were some good things that the Eisner era did do. Hey, he got Anaheim to invest hundreds of millions of dollars into creating the resort district for Disneyland. And that has still proven to be one of the best things about the Disneyland Resort.
Oh yeah, absolutely. I mean, that's a great point, Vash, because I mean, I'm old enough, I'm sure you're old enough, where we remember what that area looked like prior to DCA, because it was not. The surrounding area right now is beautiful. The Anaheim area around Disneyland looks great. It didn't always look that good. It was pretty seedy back in the day.
It was, and it give Eisner credit. Now, some of the things that they did to do that was, maybe a little shady in some respects. The Long Beach Anaheim negotiation type thing, pitting cities against each other. That's a whole other story, though. But it's profound, the changes that were made to the Anaheim Resort District under the Eisner era to pull that off and to get a city to invest. I mean, it was something like $800 million in that to just in the freeway off ramp and the access and so forth. Give it up to Eisner. He made it so that you could have an expansion to Disney California Adventure be successful, a third gate be successful. He laid the groundwork and the foundations for those things to be pulled off. Yeah. Because if you don't have the infrastructure, if we don't have that surrounding support, it's much harder to invest in Anaheim without those things than it is, than it is with them. The other thing too, he got the Disneyland hotel, the Disneyland name for hotels back from the Rather Corporation. Wow. Remember, Disney does that deal. He's sitting there in 1955. And he's like, oh my God, I need a hotel. I just don't have the money. I don't have anything. We're at a point here, fellas. Back in 55, this is about maybe, I want to say May or something like that of 55. He's cashing out his life insurance to pay for the Mark Twain. Wow. I mean, that's kind of where he's at with the Disneyland project. He just is tapped out. And again, people think, well, he had so many assets from Disney, couldn't he? No, they were separate entities at that point. Right. It'd be a huge conflict of interest if he's drawn money away from one of his other, companies into the Disneyland project because it's using company assets in a way that you're not supposed to, that kind of thing. And that was a kind of a thing going down the line, but that's a whole nother story. Anyway, he's just strapped for cash, and he needs an investor to get a Disneyland hotel on site. Jack Rather, he's this guy who's doing business in oil. He's making a lot of investments in Hollywood and so forth. He's got money. And Disney begs him, please, Jack, we need some money here to get a hotel. And Jack is like, I don't think this is going to work here, guy. I'm not. And Disney's like, okay, what if I give you the exclusive rights to the Disney name in all of Southern California for 99 years? Wow. And Rather's like, all right, well, you talked me into it. I'll build a modest little hotel. At that point, it was a motel, really. And we'll go from there. Huge success, stunning success, just hand over fist. And Walt, to his credit, was very much like, listen, I'm grateful that you did this. Let's work together in facilitating this. New Orleans Square, for example, it's built the way it is to hide out the towers that Jack Rather wanted to build for the Disney Hotel. Wow. It was a very cooperative thing. Interesting. Rather understood, hey, Golden Goose, I don't want to intrude. And Disney was like, hey, let's make this work. And let's facilitate your dream in turning the Disneyland motel into a Disneyland hotel, for realsies. Interesting. The monorail, the first stop it makes after its construction is the Disneyland Hotel. He felt like, hey, look, you did this thing for me. Let's integrate this closer for guests staying there, and the only hotel that this thing's going to stop at is yours.
Oh, wow.
Great stuff, good stuff.
Yeah.
Now, little caveat there. He says, "Listen, you just have to pay the fee to upkeep the monorail, right? The monorail station and all that." He's like, "Okay, no problem." Now, walk it, it's decades down the line here. Look at the Eisner come in and says, "Hey, we want to do what we did in Walt Disney World to what we said, right? Build the resorts, make it multi-day, all that." And they come back to him and say, "We can't." And it's like, why? We can't build a hotel in, the Disneyland Resort area, or what was to be known as the Disneyland Resort area, because Jack Rather has the exclusive name. He has exclusive rights. And it's like, what? We don't have control of the name in Anaheim? What are you talking about? So it was all about wrangling that name away from them, and they just wouldn't budge. The Rather Corporation, nah. I like the arrangement how it is. You're gonna have to come to me with a bigger offer, and I'm not budging. And Eisner, oh God, he takes that monorail fee because look, he's got this guy who's like, he's the hatchet man. He's the guy that gets it done, right?
Right.
And it's like, listen, we need to get this hotel name back. Find out what you can do. Goes through all the legal proceedings and finds out, they have an obligation to maintain the monorail station. It's that deal that Disney did. And it's like, oh, okay. That's what we use. And we'll set the fee to whatever we want. And forcing the Rather Corporation not just to sell the name back, but they took on the entire company, which is why they inherited the Spruce Goose and the Queen Mary in Long Beach to create that situation where they could have two entities like the Long Beach and Anaheim battle it out. That's where the Disney Seas projects and so forth, that's where that all emanates from. And look, Michael Eisner, to his credit, he got the name back and gave Disney the ability to build out more hotels and make the resort what it is. You might not like the way he did it, but he got it done.
And maybe that's ultimately the legacy of Michael Eisner. Maybe Michael Eisner was the seed planter. Maybe he was the guy who sort of maybe didn't see these concepts to their fullest, but he planted the seeds. Like, DCA wasn't the best park it could have been, but he planted the seed. He got it going. Right. So other CEOs like Bob Iger can come in and flesh it out. He planted the seeds for things like Pixar. The Pixar acquisition. Yeah. Maybe that's Eisner's legacy, is he was the seed planter, and he did a good job. I mean, he definitely, you couldn't have had a successful Bob Iger era without a lot of those seeds that Michael Eisner planted.
Yeah.
You know?
No, I agree. Look, Michael Eisner did have his flaws. For the biggest one, I would say one of the biggest ones was Marvel. They had multiple times they were able to buy Marvel and acquire it, and Eisner just couldn't see it. He just couldn't see how it integrated, the brand integration. He just couldn't see it, and that got Marvel into trouble with some of their licensing agreements and so forth down the line. Would we have had the Avengers in the MCU that we know today had he done that back then? Probably not, but it's just crazy to think about now. The most successful property in history, and you passed on it? But that was Eisner,
It was crazy to think too, because we've actually talked about this same thing on this show about, our superheroes, like are they appropriate for the Disney brand? And I stand true to this. I mean, it's like pirates, princesses, and superheroes. They're all the same. Like, it's that same kind of mentality, that same idea of like children looking up to these heroes, whether it's Davy Crockett, right? Whether it's Iron Man, whether it's where, it's the same kind of idea. And superheroes fit so well. Look, superheroes are a semi-modern thing, not really super modern. They've been around for a while, but it's the same in the same vein of a Davy Crockett, or Lone Ranger, I mean, it's the same idea. And for Eisner to not to see that, to not to have that, foresight, blows my mind. I really don't get it. I really don't get it.
But Eisner, the thing about him was he was very attached to the brand. He was very much attached to like what it meant, like what Disney meant to other people. And look, that tripped him up so many times. It's like Marvel being the big one, right? But just little stuff like we're not going to serve alcohol in Disneyland Paris. Why? Because that's just not Disney. And it's like, yeah, but the culture expects alcohol to be sold.
Right.
It's just they don't have they don't have the same thought regarding alcohol that we do here in the States, especially at that time. And it's like, no, we're not going to serve alcohol. And that turns a lot of people off because of that. And it's like, Jesus, man, if you're just a little less,
like less rigid,
yes, of what you thought the brand was, you could be far more successful. Go ahead.
Yeah, no, exactly. And that was, again, one of the strengths of Bob Iger in that he had a much more balanced approach to that legacy. Yep. He definitely understood more of like a foot in the past, respecting the past, respecting the nostalgia, but understanding that Disney is a forward-thinking company and we have to also go forward. It's not all about just the past. And Eisner was definitely more nostalgia-driven, legacy-driven, the old ways driven. And Iger kind of straddled it in a much more healthier, forward-thinking approach.
I think so. And, the thing about it is, the weird thing is Iger didn't start out that way, I mean, he was very much like, hey, look, you're having a dead guy run your company because everybody kept doing, hey, what would Walt have done? It's like, well, wait a minute, we got to put this in the 21st century here, fellas. I mean, this is crazy. So like he does a deal with George Lucas to get a Captain EO or a Star Tours or an Indiana Jones in the park. That had never been done before. That was like completely shocker, thinking that was just out of the box. Some of that was already in motion with Tony Baxter and so forth, but that's kind of different. I think he was like very much like, okay, we got to modern this up. But then he built this kind of sandcastle that he was very much, he didn't want to lose, didn't want to, he was very protective of what he had done and the legacy that he was entrusted with.
So he was scared to risk it.
Yeah. Yeah. And I think a lot of those things, like the Disneyland Paris thing and Frank Wells, I think a lot of that came out of that. And that's why his mentality and things changed going forward after that. And it really was detrimental to the company. And it was what he didn't want. I don't think Michael Eisner envisioned what would happen later with the Save Disney campaign and all of that. I don't think that's what he intended, but that's what happened, during these major events, and it's sad. But look, Iger, he's a guy who he like has the vision. Like when George comes up to him and says, "Hey, I'm looking to sell Star Wars," and this is like, Bob Iger is down for the opening of Star Tours: The Adventures Continue in Walt Disney World. And remember, they do that media thing when it's pretty funny if you ever look up the opening day media presentation for Star Tours out in Florida. It's really fun because they put they make like these two people in Jedi robes and they're battling with lightsabers and stuff going through the park and stuff like that, and then they go up to the stage and you turn out, oh, it's Michael Eisner and Bob Iger and George Lucas, and it was really fun. Really creative. But before that happens, George Lucas kind of says, hey, I'm looking maybe to get out of Star Wars. Wow. And Iger's like, whoa.
Well, let me get my checkbook, buddy.
Exactly, right? He's like, do you think you'd be willing to sell? If we kind of could put that into motion. And that's the difference. Is Iger it's the cow, right? It's like, I understand. There's a hit property. This is what works. This is what hits. We're going to integrate this into the company in a similar way we've done with Marvel, which gave it up to him. I mean, and honestly, with the Marvel deal, that played into it a little bit, just like it did with the Pixar deal. John Lasseter was a guy who came up to Kevin Feige and said, "Hey, look, this you should be open to this idea of Disney acquiring you, because they'll be consistent with your brand, and they won't like meddle with it, so to speak. Right. They'll let you be you." And Feige kind of influenced that with George. It's like, hey, they'll let this. They will not meddle with it in the same way, in the way that maybe you think other companies might. And gave it up. That's Iger.
Wow.
Understanding what he has and understanding what works, understanding what doesn't. Star Wars is a little bit different in that respect, as far as my view, but that's a whole other story.
It's incredible. These two men have played such an enormous role in Disney history. I'm curious about the future with a Bob Chapek era. We'll see. We'll probably do a future down the road of a Bob Chapek era. But fascinating conversation. And we can go on for hours with this, because there's so much to go on between Eisner and Bob. There is so many years with those two men running this company. Mm-hmm. It's incredible. But they both are, in every sense of the word, legends. They are Disney legends. Absolutely. Both of these men have contributed greatly, to the Walt Disney Company. Each one has their faults, but they are definitely Disney legends.
Bar none. Their contributions to Disney cannot be understated.